Tom, good morning. How you feeling today?
I am doing great. Glad this series had an exciting game and got some length to it now.
After Game 4, what did you think?
I thought Cleveland was clearly in the driver's seat. I mean, even with a pitching match, that starting pitching matchup in the favor of the Cubbies, I didn't like the vibe I was getting from the Cubs. Their offensive game was bad, poor at bats, chasing pitches. And Cleveland's pitching, especially bullpen, had been lights out. So I actually thought the game was a little shaky for the Cubs last night.
Yeah.
I didn't think their bats were that great last night. They missed opportunities to tack on runs. So they're not out of the woods yet.
I brought this up to Bob Costas, and I know it may sound strange, but is it better for baseball if the Cubs don't win the World Series?
No, I hear you. I've heard that a lot. You know, it's such a great narrative. 108 years, keep it rolling. Something, some collapse or some monumental event that causes them not to win this year to keep the narrative going. I get it. I think there's some truth to that. It's not a bad story to see the Cubs win the World Series, too, because it may never happen if, there's no guarantee this team gets back again. So they're compelling, win or lose, and some people will say even more compelling losing.
You got Arrieta in Game 6. It would feel like that's an advantage for the Cubs, but is it that much of an advantage in Cleveland?
No. I think Jake has not been on point. I think he's been very inefficient with his pitches. Command is just a little bit off. And I got to tell you, I've been impressed with this kid Tomlin because he really changed the way he threw late in the season, the last 2 months of the season, actually changed the arm slot on his curveball. And if you've been watching this series, the Indians are just destroying the Cubs with curveballs. They have pitchers who throw really good ones when you talk about all three starters and their closer, Cody Allen. And I think the key will be, you're probably only going to see Tomlin for 2 at-bats each. You talk about 2 times around the lineup for the Cubs. They better have a lead after those 18 at-bats.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they've been able to sniff Miller, Allen, and Shaw.
Yeah. And we saw that last night, and I thought that, John Smoltz and Joe made a great point that if they didn't get a run in the 4th inning, then they were in trouble because all of a sudden, come 5th inning, that's when Frank Kona is going to go to the bullpen, and then all of a sudden it's been lights out. But I'm curious how much, like we've given Frank Kona a lot of credit here with how he's handled his bullpen, but how much credit do managers deserve, or how important are managers come World Series time as opposed to maybe managing a team an entire regular season?
It's probably more important. Obviously, the stakes are higher, but I think what Terry is doing works so well because his players trust him implicitly. In other words, running Andrew Miller out there in the 5th inning of a World Series game, you can only do that when the player says, all right, this must be the right thing to do. And Terry is so good at engendering trust from his guys. All those guys in the bullpen have great stuff, and they're all okay with coming in something that's outside of, quote-unquote, the traditional role. We've got a 7th-inning guy, an 8th-inning guy, a 9th-inning guy. That was the Royals last year. And Terry's really flipped that by using any guy at any time, and he's able to do that because guys buy in. It's like, okay, this must make sense then. All right, Mike Napoli's on the bench tonight, and Santana's going to hit a home run. It's going to work out. He's going to play left field and not Burners. And I think Terry does that, all the things he does before the game, to get the trust of his players, whether it means playing cribbage with Mike Napoli, just hanging out with the guys. I think that's what makes him a really good manager. He can do unconventional things, and his team completely buys in.
It's Tom Verducci of Fox Sports Illustrated, joining us, Dan Patrick Show. That atmosphere at Wrigley Field, you knew it was going to be an atmosphere and a crazy atmosphere, but living through that, having seen that first World Series game, was it what you thought it was going to be, the atmosphere?
It was fascinating, Dan, because, yes, before Game 3, it was Mardi Gras in the streets from about 11 a.m. in the morning. I mean, it was Mardi Gras, New Year's, all combined together. Then when they lost, and they lost the second game as well, and they still weren't hitting, it was a weird dynamic last night. And I spoke with Anthony Rizzo about this, and I asked him, what was it like playing in this game with all this tension? And he said, I almost had a heart attack 3 times on the field. And he said, one thing that I felt was the nervousness of the crowd. I mean, it was a double-edged sword where they were excited, but at the same time they were nervous. It was like Fenway Park pre-2004 where you're like, all right, when is the other shoe going to drop? And I thought it was really interesting that Rizzo, playing in the game on the field, picked up the nervous energy of the crowd. So it was loud at times, and at other times it was eerily, nerve-wracking. So it's really different dynamic in that park than anywhere else.
And I didn't know if the atmosphere added more pressure to the Cubs, understanding what this game meant, what this series meant to them. You can see their faces as opposed to being in Cleveland. Is there any benefit to the Cubs being away from Wrigley and this atmosphere?
I would say the only benefit is you got Kyle Schwarber as the DH.
Yeah.
It's a much better lineup. He's going to give you a better at-bats. Atmosphere, I didn't think Cleveland was that loud. When things were going well for them, they were. But it was really cold in Cleveland, Dan. So it's one of those games where people have their heavy jackets on and gloves. And, that one game that was 4 hours, a lot of them were leaving school night before it was over. It wasn't as loud as Wrigley Field. I think it will be for Game 6. But I think the Cubs are in a better. They won't be. Listen, they won't be nervous or cower under the pressure in Cleveland. I think they're in a good spot, especially with Schwarber back in the lineup.
Well, safe travels, Tom. Great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. Great stuff. Really enjoyed the broadcast.
Thanks, Sam.
Tom Verducci, Sports Illustrated, Fox Sports.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.